Every season I try real hard to break out of my comfort zone and explore new bodies of water. Today you're joining me on one of those adventures. I'm on the Mississippi River. Now this is a place that I have a lot of experience fishing, but not on this particular section. I've chosen a 8 or 10 mile stretch of the Mississippi where I have very limited experience, and my objective is to learn a lot more about this piece of water. Now, whenever we explore someplace new, whether it's a major river like this, a lake, a reservoir, even a farm pond, the first thing we have to do is learn as much as we can, as quickly as we can, about the sort of habitat that's available. And this is where Humminbird Side Imaging is our biggest ally. And so what I'd like to do on today's episode of On the Water with the Technological Angler is show you how I use Humminbird's MEGA Side Imaging to break down a new body of water, to shorten that learning curve, get me on fish faster. So come along for the day and let's use Humminbird's MEGA Side Imaging to connect us with success on Middle America's Big River. In order to get the most out of our Humminbird Side Imaging view, we need to pay very careful attention to rigging, and in particular, how we have our side imaging transducers mounted on the back of the boat. If you were to see my boat at the ramp, you'd see that I'm not running one side imaging transducer, but rather I'm running two, one on either side of my main outboard. Well over a decade of experience working on a wide variety of both fiberglass and aluminum boats has taught me that the best Humminbird side images come from this dual side imaging transducer configuration. The side imaging transducer to the left of the main outboard, on the port side of the boat, is responsible for only collecting the left side image. Likewise, the side imaging transducer to the right of the main outboard, on the starboard side of the boat, is responsible only for collecting the right side image. Using two side imaging transducers like this, one that only looks left and one that only looks right, allows me to optimize each half of my side imaging view independently of the other. This pair of side imaging transducers also completely eliminates the possibility of some sort of midline obstruction, like a live well intake or the lower unit from my outboard, from impacting my side imaging view. By carefully optimizing both the placement and the orientation of each of these two side imaging transducers, I can easily achieve a perfect side imaging view on both sides of the boat. And that's something that can be challenging to do when you're only using one side imaging transducer to collect both sides of the side imaging view. These two side imaging transducers are linked together with a splitter cable called a side imaging left-right Y cable. And I'll put the part numbers for both a helix system as well as a solix or apex system in the video description. Now you'll notice that my transducer configuration on the back of the boat also includes a third transducer. And that one is simple. That's just a 2D skimmer transducer. Its only job is to collect my 2D sonar data. Why am I including that 2D skimmer on the back of my boat? Well, again, over a decade of experience on lots of different kinds of boats has taught me that the 2D skimmer is a much more reliable way to maintain bottom lock, especially when I'm running around the lake at full speed. The signal from that 2D skimmer transducer is blended together with the data collected by the pair of side imaging transducers using another splitter cable. This one is called a side imaging dual beam Y cable. And I'll also include the part numbers for those cables in the video description. That 3-transducer configuration works on any boat with either helix, solix, or apex fish finders, as long as you're using the appropriate splitter cables and transducers. Now, do you have to rig your boat this way? Absolutely not. The single side imaging transducer that comes with your Humminbird side imaging fish finder is perfectly capable of collecting side imaging data for both sides, both left and right, as well as down imaging, as well as traditional 2D sonar. But again, over a decade's worth of experience, working on lots of different kinds of boats, has taught me that this 3-transducer configuration, making use of the 2 different splitter cables, is the ultimate way to get the best possible side imaging data on both sides of the boat, with the added bonus of maintaining perfect bottom lock when I'm running around the lake at full speed. With your transducers optimized, you're well positioned to start collecting some very high quality side imaging data. Now, let's talk about a basic set of settings that will get you moving in the right direction. Remember that anytime we collect side imaging data with any set of settings, we want to drive the boat basically in a straight line at an idle speed. Now that can really be anywhere between 2 and say 4 miles per hour. Start with a side imaging range of around 100 feet. Now remember, that's 100 feet on the left side of the boat and 100 feet on the right side of the boat. That 100-foot side imaging range represents a really nice balance between reach, how far I'm looking to either side of the boat, and the detail that I can expect in my side imaging view. Set an initial side imaging sensitivity based on the local bottom composition. If you're going to be looking for structure and fish in a soft bottom area, then I'd recommend you start with a side imaging sensitivity of somewhere between 14 and 17. On the other hand, if you're going to be collecting side imaging data in a hard bottom area, a place where the bottom is sand or gravel or rock, then you're going to want to use a lower side imaging sensitivity, say somewhere between 10 and 12. Our ultimate goal in fine-tuning our side imaging sensitivity is that we want the side imaging view to be bright enough that we can see to the far end of our side imaging range without having it be so bright that we wash away details for objects that we see in the side imaging view. Once you optimize your side imaging sensitivity, it's time to adjust your side imaging contrast. In general terms, when we increase side imaging contrast, we'll make bright areas in the side imaging view brighter and dark areas in the side imaging view darker. Now, when we decrease side imaging contrast, the bright areas in the side imaging view will become less bright, and the dark areas in the side imaging view will become less dark. In other words, we will decrease the difference in brightness between the bright areas and the dark areas. So what's a good initial side imaging contrast? Well, over a wide range of different bottom compositions around a variety of different sorts of structures, an initial side imaging contrast that's between 10 and say 14 or 15 is probably a good place to start. So those are the 3 settings that we might change somewhat frequently when we're collecting and optimizing and interpreting our side imaging view. And the recommendations I made for your initial set of side imaging range, sensitivity, and contrast settings will be highly effective at helping you collect very high quality side imaging data as you start scouting for structure and fish. So I'm going to start in a bit of a side channel, and from above the water, it all looks fishy. There's weeds that I can see above the water, there's down trees that are extending from the shoreline. One approach would be just start outside of the marina and work your way upstream or downstream until you contact fish. But remember, we're trying to use side imaging as a tool that helps us become more efficient. So rather than just starting to blindly work my way down the structure, I'm going to use my side imaging view. I'm starting to collect some really nice data right now to help me find those key areas that are most likely to be holding fish before I ever get a rod out. So here in this little side channel, it's about 8 feet deep. Over on my right-hand side at about 75 feet out, you'll see a fairly solid but irregular bright white return. Now those are all weeds, or shoreline related weeds, or weeds that are extending off the shoreline a little bit. There are a few weeds outside of those, a little closer to this little side channel. And there are some fish as well. And what we're looking for fish, remember, are bright white sonar returns and dark sonar shadows. Some of those are very close to the weed line. Some of those are a little bit offside the weed line. Just so you know what I have my settings at, I have a side imaging range of 100 feet. My initial side imaging sensitivity here is 12, and I have a contrast value of 14. That's providing me with an image that extends all the way to the edges of my side imaging range with plenty of detail throughout. So here's a little school of fish. There's maybe 5 or so real dark sonar shadows and some bright white sonar returns. We've got a little wood that's starting to appear in the water. Again, that's totally invisible from the surface. Now between this downed wood and the shoreline, I see a large number of fish. This is the first big concentration of fish that I've seen. It's all the way from that wood that's out here near the boat all the way to the shoreline. Probably 40 or 50 fish packed into one relatively small area. Now as I proceed up the shoreline here, I've just gone past a big snag. You can see that on the shoreline. Now, it looks like from that snag above the water, there's only a couple of trees, but what's very obvious beneath the surface is that this whole section is just loaded with down wood, and packed inside of that wood, inside it and around it, are large numbers of fish. We can see both the bright white primary sonar returns and those dark sonar shadows. Now, because all of those trees are between my boat's path and the shoreline, I'm going to show you a way that we can collect some even more detailed side imaging data by only looking at 1/2 the side imaging view. In this case, it's going to be the right side of the side imaging view. So let me turn around and we'll take a look at that. All right, so I'm set up to make a second pass along this large collection of shoreline wood. And as I do so, I'm going to switch my side imaging view from looking at both sides at the same time to only focusing on the right side. So that's going to be between my boat's position and the shoreline, so we can get a closer look at those trees. And so that's really easy for me to do. I'll just go and select that I want to specifically look at the right-hand side of the side imaging view. That's what we're looking at now. Now, the reason we'll get more detail here is that now I'm going to use all the horizontal pixels that I have on my Apex 13 screen and devote those entirely to the side imaging data that comes from 1/2 of my side imaging view, so just the right-hand side. Because I'm taking half of the data, half of all the total amount of data, and spreading it out over all the horizontal pixels, I will necessarily see more detail. I'm going to get a more detailed picture of what that structure looks like, a more detailed representation of how those fish are distributed amongst the structure that's here. And it's really, you're watching it right now, it's really an incredibly detailed view of all these down trees and all the fish that are packed within them. So cool. All right, so I've come back out into the middle of this little side channel. I want to change my side imaging view back to looking at both sides rather than just the right-hand side, so I can see everything that's on both sides of the boat. I'm still going to keep my side imaging range at 100 feet and those side imaging sensitivity and contrast settings that I had before. So we're going past a small tributary right now, and as we go past this tributary, starting to see a number of fish out here in the main channel. Again, these are bright white sonar returns and dark sonar shadows. And as we keep going past this little tributary, it looks like there's a little hard bottom hump right at the mouth. So this is probably a big pile of sand that's been deposited from that tributary as it spills into this little side channel of the Mississippi River. And it looks like there's a fair number of fish that are sitting up there in that kind of high current area in that little sand hump. Now, these are not necessarily catfish. These may be things like walleyes and bass, fish that are predator fish that are using the current breaks that are on top of that little sand hump as a space to launch a predatory attack. Now, if you look past me over here, you'll see in the distance a railroad, set of railroad tracks, and then we've got some vegetation, some emergent vegetation between the tracks and the main channel. Very edge of that emergent vegetation is very obvious here in my side imaging view. It's about 75 feet away from the right side of the boat. You can see the vegetation extending into the water, so there's some submerged vegetation, some subsurface vegetation there as well. And there's a variety of fish that are using that weed edge. Now, what I see out here in the middle of the channel is really virtually nothing. The bottom is relatively clean. I don't really see a lot of fish scattered around here. The only fish that I saw in the main channel were back at the mouth of that little tributary. What I see here is weeds and fish using that weed edge. Now at the opening of this little side channel, it looks like we've got a nice little grass point that's extending off of this finger of emergent vegetation. So we've got a nice little point of all submerged weeds there and a bunch of fish that are using this side of it. So where the current is sweeping past that grass, that's where we're seeing lots of fish congregating in this particular area. Now I've run up several hundred yards from where I saw that little grass point. Right now I see a very similar looking bottom and vegetation over here to my right, but it's just totally devoid of fish. The fish that I saw were really concentrated back by that little grass point. And so it would be a mistake to go and just fish this entire grass edge thinking that the fish are going to be evenly distributed along it, kind of scattered along its entire length. Side imaging is telling us conclusively that the majority of the fish are back down where that little side channel cut in and we have the grass point underwater. So I think what I'll do is I'll just circle back and spot lock the boat near that little grass point, see if I can rustle up one of those fish. Didn't have to go too far down the edge to connect with a largemouth. There we go. Just the nothing special variety, but a largemouth nonetheless. Now this is a fish that we found with side imaging, just patrolling the edge of this grass. Side imaging makes it easy to find the fish. All you have to do now is make them bite. Well, not a huge surprise. We pulled one fish, kind of in the exact same spot that Humminbird side imaging said that they would be, just above that little grass point. I fished my way through the area that, when I ran through it first with side imaging, looked barren. Turned out to be barren. I didn't get a strike, and so we're going to push on. Going to look at a couple of other little side cuts that have a lot of vegetation in them and some current, and then move out to the main channel. Well, I'm going to move into another little side cut here that has a little grass island kind of in the middle of it. The current is wrapping around that little grass island. On my side imaging view, I've got some nice grass off to my left. Some of that is visible above the surface and some of it is not. Really a fair amount of grass. What I like to see here is that grass is pushed over from the currents. There's a fair amount of flow coming through this little restricted area. That's always good in the middle of the summer. The water temperature is 78 degrees. Well, here we have something interesting. We have really a hard edge of the grass. We've got open sand off to my right. Can see some fish kind of scattered around there. This is an area, a little sand flat where some current is washing across it. So these may be kind of our favorite current-loving fish, right? Walleyes or smallmouth bass. Really quite a large number of fish in this little area that's pretty shallow. It's only about 4 feet deep. So I think what we'll do is we will try to catch a couple of these guys. I think while I'm here in the middle of this little sand flat, I'll just pop a little boot-tail minnow on a 3/8 ounce jig. A little presentation that's a little bit better suited to open water. There's a fish. Open water than the chatterbait. There he's on the surface. I missed him. Looks like a walleye. Oh yeah, nice one. There he is. There we go. Walleyes on a sand flat. Spotted them with side imaging. Right, got the boat kind of in the right position. Gave him a presentation that's appropriate for that sort of situation. Now we got one for the frying pan. Nice one. Oh, look at them all. As I'm fishing here and the boat's turning, can see in the shoreline weeds a little pocket that's got 5 or 6 really nice looking returns in it. So once we get done working this flat, we're going to have to pay some attention to that too. Oh, big bass. Oh, we're hooked up on a big largemouth. Came over here into that grass where I marked a bunch of fish. Went back to chatterbait and about 3 casts, and this is what we're dealing with here. Oh, there we go. That's a quality largemouth, no matter where you go. On a chatterbait, the razor shad trailer. Nice big green bass. Now this is a fish that we saw on side imaging hiding in this shoreline grass as we were walleye fishing. There he is, what a beauty. There's still a few fish around here, so I think we'll fish this spot a little more. Kind of feel like we might be able to get one more bite out of here, and then I think we'll go out in the main channel of the Mississippi and take a look around at a couple of wing dams and see if we can't pull a walleye or 2 off those wing dams here as we get later in the day. Well, now that I've moved out here to the main channel, the biggest difference when it comes to my side imaging settings is that out here, I'm going to reduce my sensitivity. Right out here in the main channel, everything is hard. The bottom is hard packed sand. I'm going to spend my time looking at wing dams and rock piles for fish. And so since everything out here is hard, I'm going to have to reduce my sensitivity to be able to maintain some level of detail around all those hard items. And so while in the backwaters, I might have been able to use a side imaging sensitivity of 12 to 14, out here in the main channel, you know, a side imaging sensitivity of 9 or 10 is about right. That allows me to see all the way out to the edges of my side imaging range. I'm still using a range of 100 feet, yet allows me to see all the detail around these wing dams that I'm scouting for fish. And this one right now is pretty fishy. There's one. Right on top of the rocks. Feels like a nice fish. Staying down nice. Ooh, big walleye. heavy Mississippi River fish. Look at that big, beautiful Mississippi River walleye. They just don't get any better looking than that. What a beautiful fish. You know, side imaging is the key to every successful fishing trip. Whether it's to a body of water that you've been on many times in your life, or today, like it is for me, on a brand new piece of water where I have very limited experience. Side imaging helps me identify key structural features, helps me find where exactly those fish are holding, put my casts in the right place at the right time, and catch giant fish like that one. And I hope today's episode of On the Water with the Technological Angler has given you the confidence to use side imaging on your next trip to a brand new piece of water to help you break it down faster, catch more and bigger fish. Hey, I'm Jason Halfen, the Technological Angler, and I'll see you on the water.